Good morning, everyone. As promised, I am going to record a separate video which only includes the concepts that we need to learn on our topics. Okay? So, for the rest of this quarter, of the third quarter rather, we will be talking about animal diversity. So, we are going to touch about this relatively large clade of organisms that have known to flourish on Earth for some time. Okay, so um, in the picture, no, we have here chameleon, and I think it's one of the interesting animals in the terrestrial environment, no. Kasi for the marine environment, I've always considered octopus, but chameleon, no, they can blend uh, in its environment, and it can wield its long sticky tongue and to catch prey, and coupled with very high speed, it's able to get its food, no. And many species of chameleons can change their color. Okay, and this change in coloration can be a form of protection for themselves, and also by tawag dyan, making them better predators. Okay, so the chameleon is just one example of an animal that is an efficient consumer of other organisms. Okay, so um, uh, together with chameleon, these and other animals are effective na eating machines because they have these specialized muscle and nerve cells that enable them to do so. Okay, so animals also, apart from their function in terms of being effective na eating machines, they are very good at processing their food kasi nga they have this efficient digestive system, no? With mouth at one end and then anal region at the other. So in this lesson, we are going to embark on a tour of the animal kingdom, and this will be for the rest of the third quarter. For this lesson, we are going to start, no, we are going to kick off by trying to understand the general characteristics of animals, a bit of their evolutionary history, and also their body plans that will help us understand their function. So learning objectives for this lesson, we should be able to annotate the general characteristics of animals across various taxa, map out animal body plans, and grasp an overview of animals' evolutionary history. Okay? So you can see in the picture, no, that many but not all animals are able to move from place to place. Okay? They are so diverse wherein only a few criteria would fit them all. Talagang there's always tawag dyan, an exception to the rule. Okay? So other organisms are able to move, but flying is very much unique to animals like the butterfly that you can see here, no? Some animals are also very unique in terms of size and form. Like say for example this millipede right here, which is an example of an invertebrate, no? When we say invertebrate, these are animals that do not have a backbone. Okay? And another salient feature of animals would be the process that they undergo in terms of their development, no? Beginning with a series of cell divisions we call cleavage, which will produce this structure right here, no? You can see this multi-celled na structure we call a blastula. So these are just some of the interesting features of animals, and they are known to be the most abundant living organisms on Earth. They can be found in every habitat, and they bewilder us in their diversity and form, their habitat, their behavior, and lifestyle. Talagang there's just so much to consider, no, when we talk about animals. Okay? So ito yung pag-uusapan natin today. So despite their diversity, we can draw some general characteristics. So when we talk about animals, basically it's all animals are metazoans, no, and they share the general characteristics. Okay, they are multicellular heterotrophs. Okay, they do not have cell wall. They employ active movement. They are the largest consumers on Earth, and they are classified into two groups, no, with and without a backbone. Okay, that is why in the learning guide it's divided as either invertebrate and vertebrate diversity. Okay, but there are many other ways that we can classify animals. So pag-uusapan din natin yan today. Okay, multicellular heterotroph, ibig sabihin it's composed of many cells, and these cells are differentiated into tissues and organs na meron siyang specialized functions. They're very much different from fungi, from protists, and to our unicellular organisms. Heterotroph, ibig sabihin they cannot make their own food. They do not have a cell wall at may implication din yan siya, no? In terms of their characteristic. And also they are, I think the whole, based on my understanding, no, yung hallmark talaga ng animals is that they move, although there are exceptions to the rule. Okay? To that one. In terms of multicellularity, alam natin that all animals are multicellular and they have these complex bodies, no? In the picture right here, you can see ecdyses, no? These blue crab right here shedding its exoskeleton by the process of ecdysis or molting, no? Something na hindi nakikita in other organisms. So if you, for example, was able to if you for example were able to um uh tawag dyan, discover a unicellular heterotrophic organism, would you put it under animal under kingdom Animalia? It should not be, no. It should be under protists because they are chiefly multicellular. And the absence of cell walls in animals makes them flexible in nature. Okay, and they lack this rigid cell wall, and this imparts their flexibility of their cells, no, shown here. And the many cells of animal bodies are held together by these extracellular frames of structural proteins such as collagen. Okay, and other proteins form unique intercellular junctions between animal cells. Okay, so something that's very unique, no? Unlike that of fungi, again, that's chitin, di ba? For plants, that's cellulose. But for animals, predominantly, yung structural proteins that dominates its extracellular frames would be that of collagen. Okay, heterotrophic also, they need to ingest other organisms to get or to meet their nutritional demands. And this is also a way that we can classify animals. If an animal consumes autotrophic organisms, it's an herbivore. If it consumes heterotrophs, that animal is said to be a carnivore. And if it consumes both autotrophs and heterotrophs, that's omnivores. Okay? Idadagdag lang natin dito yung ating detritivores, which are basically organisms that are able to prey or consume detrital matter, no, yung ating decomposing matter. So we have examples in the slide, no, we have a snail, a millipede, and crab, and they are usually on the lower strata, no, of ecosystems. Okay? And then, again, yung most striking characteristic ng animals would be active movement. And it's directly related to the flexibility of their cells compared to plants, no, because of these cellulose that imparts rigidity. Yung collagen is relatively more flexible, but it is, of course, durable, no? And this active movement can be traced down to the evolution of nerve and muscle tissues. Okay? Kasi nagkaroon na ng specialized tissues dito sa ating animals. And a remarkable form of movement that's unique to all animals would be flying. Okay? And some animals, yung mga exception to the rule, no? Those who cannot move from place to place, meron tayong example dyan, yung barnacles natin. That's an example of sessile organisms, meaning that they are attached to the substrate or do so rarely or slowly like the sea anemones right here. We call them sedentary. Okay? In terms of diversity of form of habitat, the animal form vary greatly also, no? You have in here invertebrate like a starfish and a fighting fish. We have these vertebrate organism. Okay? So that's how we classify, no? And mas marami yung invertebrate than vertebrate organisms. Okay? And most animals are known to be members of the marine environment. Okay? But of course, there are organisms that are known to dominate animal life on land. Okay? In terms of reproduction, most animals would reproduce sexually, and yung diploid stage would usually dominate yung life cycle. Diba? Unlike sa fungi, if you try to recall, it can have these haploid hyphae, and this haploid hyphae no, will fuse no, yung kanilang cytoplasm from different parents by the process of plasmogamy, and over some time, one cell can have two nuclei. In the case of animals, that's not. Okay? In here, no, the haploid cells do not divide by mitosis first, but they rather fuse directly with each other to form the zygote or yung ating fertilized egg. Wala rin tayong counterpart among animals, no, yung alternation of the haploid na gametophyte and the diploid na sporophyte. Walang ganun sa animals. Okay, it's basically the fusing of the zygote, and this zygote will later on progress into what we call embryonic development. No, when the zygote is formed, it will undergo what we call a cleavage. And this episode right here is basically a succession of mitotic cell divisions without cell growth between each division. So you just try to think that a zygote would have this series of mitotic cell division. Mitotic, ibig sabihin, kahit nagde-divide siya in a ball, okay, in a ball of zygote, yung number of chromosomes are still held the same. Okay? And you can see here, no, this picture right here, part right here, that an 8-cell embryo, you can see here, parang siyang two quadrants, and each quadrant meron siyang apat na cells, no? And each cell embryo right here is formed by 3 rounds of cell division. So you have a mature zygote, first round of division creates 2, 2 creates 4, and 4 creates 8. So mura na siya 4 by 2. Okay? If you try to look at this planar region right here. And in most animals, the cleavage should produce a multicellular stage. That's what we call a blastula. So over time, this blastula no, would create the rest of the organism. But blastula is typically just a hollow ball of cells that is surrounded by a cavity that we call blastocele. Okay, so continuous division of this one right here will give rise to blastula, and this blastula will later on create this hollow portion. Okay, this hollow portion right here, no, which creates a cavity that we call a blastocele. In most animals, okay, the embryo at this stage no, would undergo gastrulation. And the embryo at this stage is also called gastrula in some textbooks. So gastrulation is basically a process in which one end of the embryo would fold inward, it would expand, and it would eventually fill the blastocele. So come to think of it na para siyang modeling clay. No? Just look at it like a modeling clay tapos hollow sa gitna. Okay? What happens is, over time, by the process of gastrulation, yung one end of this gastrula right here will fold inward, it will expand, and it will occupy what's inside, no, yung cavity, yung blastocele natin. And it would later on produce layers of these embryonic tissues. So later on, kasi nga may inward na nag-fold, yung nasa loob is what we call the endoderm, and then yung sa labas, yung sa outer layer is ectoderm, and then sa loob will be endoderm. So yung pouch na na-form dito by gastrulation is what we call archenteron. Okay? And the archenteron would have this opening to the outside via what we call the blastopore. So basically, this yellow right here, no, if you follow my pointer, is archenteron. Archenteron is actually like the primitive na mouth, and the opening is what we call a blastopore. Okay? And later on, this one right here, the endoderm of these archenteron, kung ano yung nasa loob, yung yellow na yan, no, would later on develop into tissue linings of the animal's digestive tract, and the rest will be that of, say, for example, the musculature, the nervous system, the integumentary system, and then sometimes organisms would have this body cavity, that's separating the ecto and endoderm. Some don't. So ito also is a way for us to classify organisms. So we are going to touch about acoelomate, pseudocoelomate, and coelomate later on. Okay? So embryos also of some animals develop into what we call a larva, which looks very different, very distinct from that of adult species. Yung metamorphosis, this is basically a radical reorganization, no? Transforming into the adult bioform, wherein this involves a conspicuous and relatively mabilis siya na change in the animal's body structure. And coupled with these abrupt change should be changes in terms of cell growth, pagdami ng cell. No, we're not talking about cells becoming enlarged. No, when we talk about cell growth at this point, it's cells becoming more, and also cell differentiation. Kasi take note, yung animals natin, they have these specialized tissues with specialized functions. Something that's also unique to them. Okay. So just a concept checkpoint. Why is it impossible for animals to be the first type of life to have evolved? Simply because they are just so complex. If they are the first animals to have evolved, then ibig sabihin, they have to feed themselves during the Earth's geologic time scale. And alam natin that Earth before is not the same to what it is today. And that goes to say na wala siyang plants before na pwedeng kainin, so on and so forth, then definitely animals are not in the picture. Okay? So we just try to track yung evolution ng animals from unicellular organisms at in and if you try to refer in LG 1.11.1, yung importante lang talaga doon na malaman natin is what we call yung ating Cambrian period, no? It's called Cambrian explosion not because nagkaroon ng meteorite explosion that hit the earth, no? But it's an important point in the history of life on Earth because this is when most of the major groups of animals first appear in the fossil record. So if you try to date back Cambrian period, it's around 500 to 540 million years ago. Okay, and this is credited to the relatively short time over which the diversity of animal forms appear. So if you try to type Cambrian explosion, this is what you would usually see, no? Yung parang scorpion-like aquatic organisms that have known to flourish on Earth before. And paano nila nasabi na it's during this Cambrian period, no? This is done by radiometric dating because these are organisms with exoskeleton, and these exoskeleton were mineralized, and when it's dated back, most of those that were retrieved dates back to Cambrian. So bakit daw sa kadami-dami ng period, no, and then ng epoch, okay, bakit daw around Cambrian period, okay, ang most fossils na retrieved? Biologists have argued this one for decades, and it ignited they're trying to understand what ignited this, what they call as evolutionary burst. Some think that there is a steep rise in oxygen that sparked the explosion of life, no? Whereas others say that it sprang from the development of some key na evolutionary innovation like yung ability of organisms to see other organisms. So the precise cause has remained elusive kasi wala namang nabuhay at that point, no? In part because there's so little that's known about the physical and chemical environment at that time. So we can only rely to what the fossil records tell us. But the problem with fossil records, hindi naman lahat ng organisms are able to have fossils when they die, no? Hindi naman lahat nagiging mineral deposits. Kasi for example, if you're a soft-bodied organism and if you died like 1,000 million years ago, definitely it would be difficult for you to tawag dyan, to embed or like to to become fossilized over time. Kasi nga soft-bodied ka. Okay? And understanding how the history of life has proceeded, not only can be looked on the facet of evolution, but also examining yung types of animal bodies and body plans that's present in fossils and in existence today. So when we talk about body plan, this is basically uh, a term that aims to understand yung resemblance in growth, in structure, in function of members of the animal kingdom. And it's basically what we call a blueprint, And although animals' genes represented and executed the animal body plan, it may also be affected by environmental factors. For instance, the animal body plan will tell us about exposure to a noxious substance, malnourishment, or how they survive and thrive in their environment. Okay, so there are 5 key innovations that can be noted in animal evolution. In terms of symmetry, in terms of the specialized tissues, in terms of coelom or the body cavity, embryonic development, and segmentation. So ito yung pag-uusapan natin today, no? Sa second half ng ating lesson. So in terms of body plan, so here are pictures that can help us better understand what we mean by this, no? So radial symmetry is basically an means that the array of body parts is throughout a central axis. So if you have a central axis, like in this case of a jellyfish, okay, right here, okay, what happens, or hydra right here, no? If you draw an imaginary central axis and you cut it like a pizza, you get equal parts. Okay? Radial symmetry would portray animals with an up and down orientation. So mayroon siyang anterior, meron siyang posterior end, which means that any plane that's cut along this longitudinal axis makes equivalent halves. Pero hindi siya exactly left and right na identical images. Okay? So yung two halves of a radially symmetrical animal can be labeled to as an oral side, which contains the mouth. Kung nasaan yung mouth, that's usually the oral side, and the aboral side is usually the part without a mouth. Okay? So very common siya among nidarians, like yung ating actinophores also, no? Yung ating comb jellies. You have yung ating nidarians, example, jellyfish, sea anemones, kayo yung sinabi ko kanina, no? And these creatures are usually static or freely floating, or if they move, they're usually going together, no, with the water current. Okay? Bilateral symmetry naman involves the partition of an animal across a sagittal plane. Okay? Usually, yung ating mid-sagittal would produce yung two identical images. No? You have the right half and the left half. So animals with bilateral symmetry, meron tayong tinatawag na cephalocaudal orientation, meaning na meron tayong right and left, meron tayong front or the ventral, at meron tayong back as the dorsal, and the head as the anterior, and the tail part as the posterior. So in terms of how they function, bilateral symmetry would permit for the steering motion, no, as compared to radial symmetry, which is fitted for immobile or restricted mobility na lifestyles. In an evolutionary sense, yung bilateral symmetry would support yung dynamic na movement, no, and improve complexity of getting their food and hunting activities. Okay? Because most organisms that are bilaterally symmetrical are able to employ active movement. Okay? So that's the comparison. And we also have asymmetrical animals, which is in this example, we have the sponges, no? Yung ating marine sponges. Okay? Bilateral symmetry also constitutes a major evolutionary advancement in the animal body plan. So gaya na sinabi ko kanina, no, yung bilaterally symmetrical animals are able to move through the environment in a consistent direction. And the reason for this is this bilateral symmetry is tawag dyan, it's usually considered a consequence, no, of the development of the animal in what we call cephalization. So yung cephalization na to, it's basically an evolutionary um, happening, or evolutionary trend in which over the course of generations, no, yung mouth, you have the sensory organs, you have the nerve ganglia become concentrated at the frontal end of an animal which will produce the head region. So maron na siya karangkuan ba main server, okay? And this is where nagko-concentrate, for example, yung nervous functions, okay, on how it transmits and receives and reads signals, okay? And much of the layout of the nervous system in bilaterally symmetrical animals, it's usually centered on the in this longitudinal nerve cord, no? And this information is processed and it will also command the appendages or other parts of the organisms to function. Okay, so cephalization is often considered a consequence of the development of bilateral symmetry. And when we talk about body plans, we cannot shy away from common directional terms that we can use to describe the position of body parts. So I will leave that to you to read. No, definitely this is not the last time that you're going to encounter this one, especially if you are keen on pursuing medical courses later on. You need to understand, say for example, when you say it's dorsal, ventral, parang ganun. Okay? Because it's crucial to define the location of one organ relative to another. For example, if you're explaining to a patient, or if you are um, trying to um, trying to convey a medical statement. Okay? So I leave that to you to read. Okay? In terms of body planes also, when you say body planes, this is a way wherein we can separate animal bodies into two sections. Okay? So sagittal plane separates the body into right and left na sections. Okay? At meron tayong iba't ibang sagittal planes. Mid-sagittal, ibig sabihin, it's precisely uh, splitting the body of an organism in the center, and it will produce identical right and left sections. Okay, so you have the blue plane of symmetry right here. Coronal naman divides the front and the back. So you have this coronal or yung frontal plane natin dito, no? May front ka, merong back. Horizontal plane naman, ibig sabihin up and down. So you have the upper and lower, such as this yellow right here kay goat and then red kay animal. Okay? Other term would be transverse or cross section. And in medicine, no, sometimes the transverse cut is an angle, and this is termed as oblique plane, like these black lines shown here. Okay? In terms of body cavity also, this is also an important evolutionary improvement that's emerging among the bilaterally symmetrical animals. So body cavity is also synonymous to what we call coelom. Okay? Coelom is basically this fluid-filled space that surrounds the gut, okay, the digestive tract, and in a tube within a tube arrangement which permits greater elasticity of the body cavity. So ano yung naka-embed kay coelom? Yung coelom no body cavity would be the space for visceral organs. Okay? So this is also a way on how we categorize animals, no? So cells of most animals are organized into three layers or germ layers. You have the outer layer ectoderm, inner layer endoderm, and the intermediate mesoderm. And animals with two embryonic cell layers only, if both ecto and endoderm lang, is an example of diploblastic organism. And if um, an animal is contains 3 embryonic cell layers. That's what we call triploblastic. And all triploblastic animals are members of or are bilaterally symmetrical animals. Okay? So a coelomate is basically wala siyang body cavity, no. Diretso lang siya na ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. Okay? Or like from the inside, no, that's endo, meso, and ecto. Pseudocoelomate naman, okay? Ano yung pinagkaiba niya? So I'd like to point this out na para siyang from simple to more complex as you progress to the coelomate na part, no? Pseudocoelomate naman, okay? You can see in here that the digestive, although meron siyang body cavity, but the digestive cavity is not lined by mesodermally derived na tissue. Okay? Sa coelomate naman, the digestive tract, the digestive cavity is covered, no, is surrounded by this mesodermally derived tissue. So naghahanap ako ng analogy, no. It's difficult to tawag diyan to 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 visualize, no. Think of it as parang baunan. So ito siya, 'di ba, kung may baunan kayo, yung purpose ng baunan mo, lalagyan mo siya ng pagkain. So think of the pagkain as your organs, kasi the body cavity is the site kung saan situated yung body organs. In flatworm, say for example, okay, wala siyang body cavity, so all the organs will just be embedded in the mesoderm. Gets? Kasi wala siyang body cavity. Pseudocoelomate naman, para siyang baunan pero wala siyang partition. So pwedeng meron siyang hollow na space. Okay, yung baunan ng acoelomate, wala siyang space. So ang mangyayari, yung pagkain, hindi mo siya malalagay or like ipupush mo siyang malagay kumbaga sa baunan kahit wala siyang space. Yung pseudocoelomate naman, meron siyang space. Meron siyang spaces into what we call a pseudocoelom, at ito yung site kung saan malalagay yung ating body organs. Okay? Ano yung pinagkaiba niya kay coelomate? Yung coelomate naman, ibig sabihin meron kang baunan na meron siyang partition wherein you can have tawag dyan, part of your baunan na meron kang sandwich, meron ka for example rice, meron kang viand, parang ganun. Okay? Meron talaga siyang separate na compartmentalization. And this compartmentalization are tissues that's derived from the mesoderm. Okay? So meron yun siya mga implications, no? In terms of complexity, of course, mas complex yung ating coelomate organisms, and coelomate organisms allow better growth ng ating organs kasi nga meron siyang separate na enclosure, no? Hindi siya proportional. Say for example, like yung lungs would also increase in size in the same way as the heart. It does not go that way. Very distinct, very separate siya kasi nga separate yung kanyang compartment with other organs. Okay? And also in terms of circulatory system, kasi nga they have these complex structures right now, no? And basically this is just a network of these vessels that carry fluid to and from the parts of the body. Okay? So in open circulatory system, the blood would pass from vessels into the sinus, and it would mix with the body fluid, and it would bathe the cells or tissues, then re-enter the vessel in another location. In closed circulatory system naman, the blood would flow entirely within blood vessels. Okay? So yung pinagkaiba lang nila, kapag open circulatory, okay, the blood, or say for example in shrimps, no, yung hemolymph natin, okay, would bathe the whole organism. So if you try to get yung parang blood na counterpart ng shrimp or like ng arthropods, you don't need to look for the vein. Okay? Kasi you can just get blood. Kasi it's bathing the whole organism. It's encompassing the whole organism. Okay? And for closed circulatory naman, you cannot just insert the injection the syringe, no, needle in your body, tapos you expect to get blood kasi that can contain visceral mass, no? That can contain adipose tissues, that can contain muscle, okay? Yung circulatory system natin is closed. Basically, yung blood natin would flow entirely within networks of what we call blood vessels, and it's separate from other body fluids. Okay? That is why, di ba, pag nagpapakuha ka ng dugo, kailangan hanapin muna yung ugat before makakuha ka ng blood. Kay shrimp, you can just look, you can just view, no, usually blue yung blood, no, ng fresh na shrimp if buhay pa siya. Okay? And tawag dyan, this is encompassing the whole organism. Okay? And we also can differentiate organisms depending on their embryonic development. So take note, as soon as the zygote is formed, we can nag-follow dito yung ating embryonic development. Okay? We have your cleavage right here, and this cleavage is basically yung subsequent na cell division after the zygote is formed, right? And for protostomes, take note, diba, after 3 rounds of division, the zygote will mitotically divide into an 8-cell stage. And at this point, no, we can already differentiate protostome and deuterostome. Okay? In terms of the 8-cell stage, no, after cleavage, yung sa 8-cell, you think of it as 4x2 na cells. 4 sa taas, 4 sa baba. Okay? Spiral and determinate siya kay protostome. Spiral kasi hindi siya exactly na overlay kung ano yung nasa taas at saka nasa baba na cells. If you try to compare this one with deuterostomes, yung cells sa upper quadrant exactly nakalapat siya, no, mara siyang overlay, tama ba overlay? Mara siyang naka-position siya sa cells na nasa baba. Okay? It's an example of radial and indeterminate. Radial kasi mura siya na siya radial symmetry, no? If you cut it like a pizza from this topmost portion, you will get equal parts. Okay? Spiral naman is it's called spiral because hindi siya exactly nagfi-fit, no? Yung cells sa upper quadrant with the lower quadrant. Determinate and indeterminate has something to do with the fate, no? Kung ano yung kalalabasan ng cells. Determinate, ibig sabihin, at this point right here, we can already infer what these cells will later on turn into. Will it be part of the digestive tract, of the nervous system, of the musculature, of the integumentary system? Indeterminate naman, ibig sabihin, each of these cells right here has an equal chance of becoming a specific tissue or becoming part of a specific tissue. Okay? That's indeterminate. Okay? So as this one would progress, take note ano yung nangyayari. It will create this what we call yung blastula, and this blastula over time, no, will have this hollow na region with a body cavity. That's what we call blastocele, and via the process of gastrulation, diba, yung ating pag-fold inward ng one part ng ating blastula, it will create yung ating coelom. And this coelom is the beginning, no, of the gastrula na stage. So in protostome, okay, the coelom would form yung ating parang splits, no, from the mesoderm. Okay? So it nag-form na yung ating archenteron right here, and the coelom would be basically made up of tissues that's derived directly from the mesoderm, no? It will form a split, no? So if yung red natin will be ang ating mesoderm, at yung hollow space na to will later on create yung lightish red, no, yung light red na coloration would form the coelom. In the case of deuterostomes naman, this will basically become out pockets, no? It will form out pockets of the mesoderm of the archenteron. Okay? So if this is the primitive mouth or the archenteron right here, the coelom would form as these out pockets. Okay? And yung fate of the blastopore, yung last difference, no, in protostome, unang na-form yung mouth from the blastopore. Blastopore is basically, di ba, yung opening ng ating archenteron. Okay? And then later on, si anus. In deuterostome naman, the mouth would later on form. So mauna yung anal region before yung mouth. Okay? That's for deuterostomes. So that's also one way of how we differentiate, no, organisms. So protostome, again, yung mouth of the adult animal would form in the opening of the blastopore. Okay? So this is very common among flatworms, nematodes, you have mollusks, annelids, and arthropods. So usually yung mga lower forms of animals. Deuterostomes naman, okay, for example, animals and humans are example of deuterostomes, ano? Kasi unang na-form yung ating anus before the mouth. Okay? And lastly, another yung salient na feature among animals would be segmentation. And this is only exhibited among annelids, no? Yung ating mga segmented worms, yung ating arthropods, yung meron silang exoskeleton and then paired na jointed appendages, and of course, some chordates. Okay? So this is basically a repetition of structural units across the body of the animal. And each of these segment is what we call a metamere or somite. Okay? And segments comprise both outer and inner. Hindi lang siya nasa loob. Okay? This can include repetitive sections of nerves, tissues, blood vessels, and yung setae natin for locomotion. Okay? So, that's it for the general characteristics, no, and animal body plan. If you have questions or clarifications, please do not hesitate to call my attention. Okay? So God bless everyone and stay safe.